tech through to biz dev and other commercial entities. So yeah,
it's fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's over to the forum.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Pioneer Keynote, which is going to be delivered by Ade Rawcliffe. Ade is Head of Diversity at ITV Commissioning, and she's going to be speaking with journalist Kate Russell all about the competitive advantage that comes through driving inclusivity. We're going to also be using Slido again. If you're not familiar with this, just head onto your internet browser, go to Slido and type in IBC 2018, and that will take you through to this session so you can pose your questions. So for now, let me hand over to the lovely Kate Russell.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgie. Wonderful. My favourite Channel 5 person, that. It's wonderful to be here back on the IBC Forum stage to talk about what has to be my favourite topic, diversity. I've been campaigning for gender diversity in the tech sector for going on 10 years now. And, you know, we can bang on and on and on about this, and I think we all know that there is, you know, gender diversity in working in the tech sector is a good thing. It's good for everybody. But I'm really excited because today we're going to take that conversation in a completely different area and talk about commissioning and the importance of creating content that is diverse, that is more representative of your audiences, and, you know, takes the conversation of diversity beyond the realm of just gender diversity, because there are many, many other layers of diversity. In order to do that, we're very lucky to have a really special guest. She made a name for herself spearheading Channel 4's 360 Diversity Charter, overseeing the creation of the channel's commissioning diversity guidelines and bringing fantastic content to our screens like BAFTA award-winning drama Run. She was also part of the team responsible for Channel 4's coverage of Rio 2016 and London 2012 Paralympics, which broke records for bringing both talent in front of the screen and behind the screen and behind the cameras in the production side, for bringing disabled talent into the family of production staff for those events. Today, she heads up diversity commissioning for ITV. She's a powerful force for achieving true representation of the viewing public in ITV's content. She is truly a champion for diversity of all types, and I'm thrilled to invite her onto the stage. Please welcome the amazing Ade Rawcliffe. Welcome to you. Thank you. Take a seat. Take a seat. So we're going to dive straight in with the conversation, and as Georgie said, we are going to be using Slido. I would really love to get plenty of conversation from you. You know, hear about the things that are important to you. And also, the joy of using Slido is if everybody wants to ask a question, we obviously can't do them all, but we can also vote up. So even if you don't have a question to ask, go along to the app, see what questions other people are asking, and vote up the ones that you want to hear asked. And then we can make sure we get to the content that is the most important to all of you in here today. But I'm going to start, because I've got some questions. Ade, it's great to see you.
Hi.
You know, I mentioned before, we're all getting now quite comfortable with the idea of talking about gender diversity. Yep. But it's a no-brainer that it works. You know, a balanced workforce is going to be good for business. What's the current situation within commissioning, global, you know, sort of generally?
Yeah. I mean, when I went to work at ITV, I thought it would be really, really useful to sort of understand what we meant, and what we meant by diversity and what we meant by inclusion. And what it absolutely is about representing the world accurately. I mean, this is a sort of quote that I like to borrow from Shonda Rhimes, which is this idea that what we're trying to do when we talk about representation and inclusion is we're trying to normalize the world of television so that the world on screen reflects the world that we all live in. So in commissioning terms, what we're trying to do always is to ensure that we have the widest range of voices on screen and also people behind the camera. And I think it really, really matters, because there was an article in Broadcast last week which came as no surprise. If people see themselves represented in content, they're more likely to enjoy watching it. So it's a commercial benefit as well as the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a moment to read that, because I have not read it myself. I really hate the word diversity. It suggests something other, as if it is something special or rare, as if there's something unusual about telling stories involving women and people of colour and LGBTQ characters on TV. I have a different word, normalising. I'm normalising TV, and that's from Shona Rhimes. I love that quote. Yeah, it does get to the heart of things. And, you know, when we talk about one of the things that, you know, I've discovered in trying to promote gender diversity is actually, you know, when you point up the lack of girls, particularly in trying to get young girls along to coding clubs, when you point up the lack of girls in them, that tends to put girls off because you're talking about the other, you're talking about the different. And no teenager wants to be seen as different from the rest of the crowd because that makes them a potential target, right?
Yeah. No, I think that as content creators, we have real power in our hands in terms of how we represent people and how we tell stories. And, you know, it's a well-known fact that when women see themselves portrayed as things, they're more likely to want to become them. So, for example, the great example is that when the Hunger Games was on, you know, by 100% increased the amount of girls that took up archery because, you know, to be it, you need to see it. And so I think that's another thing that's really important. So when we're thinking about casting roles, particularly on gender diversity, it's important to see women as the strong characters, as characters in charge. That really, really matters.
Yeah, and actually seeing people of colour, people
Yes.
of different cultures, people of different genders, playing roles that aren't necessarily gender or race specific, right?
Yeah,
Just generally because that's the best
really,
person
really
for the
matters. I
role.
mean, we've got a new character in Emmerdale, which is one of our big soaps, and he's called Ryan Stocks, and he's the long-lost son of Charity Dingle, so a really, really big character. And the actor has cerebral palsy, and what's brilliant is that's not the story. The story is he's the long-lost son, and we've had such positive feedback from people saying it's really refreshing to see a disabled character cast in prime time talking about things that we all recognise, not talking just about their disability.
Well, listen, before we carry on with the discussion, let's, because I know you've done great work already, we've got a quick sizzle reel of the work that currently you can expect to see in this area on ITV. So if we could run that video. Goosebumps going on. Do you think that broadcasters realise the role, are taking their role seriously enough in terms of the responsibility they have to the viewing public to create that representation, to create the stage on which you can see it to be it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the journey broadcasters have been on, I think that broadcasters have got much better at it, and I think across all the major channels you can see better representation of different groups in society. But I think we could all do more, because I think that when I was growing up in the north of England, I very rarely saw people that looked like me on screen. Now my kids all the time see people that look like them, but they expect to see it, and I think if they don't see people that look like them, they go to channels where they will. So it's a really commercial, competitive advantage to be as inclusive as possible. But I think there is more we can all do, hence my role. I mean, I think if we were perfect at it, you wouldn't need people doing my job, would you?
No, exactly. And, we're hearing again and again across all of the tracks here at IBC, there are so many different content streams now, content avenues. The digital landscape has exploded the choice vector exponentially. If you don't, as broadcasters, as the big mainstream broadcasters get it right, then the new generation, they are very happy to go away from the mainstream, aren't they, and take those sort of niche channels and find the content they want in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think for ITV, when we're at our strongest, we're the nation's biggest entertainment channel, and we are at our strongest when we're including diversity and different voices in the mainstream. So on the reel, there was a clip of Lost Voice Guy, who's a guy with cerebral palsy who won Britain's Got Talent, which is our biggest entertainment show. And obviously, what we do is we always say to the production company, be as inclusive as possible in who you're casting. So we want a range of people that represent the UK, but we have no input on who runs. That's a public vote. So it's quite heartening when you see that the public choose that, because you think to yourself, you know what, we are doing the right thing. It does feel that we're in step with public opinion, because they're seeing this guy and going, all we see is his talent, and that's what we see first. That's why we've chosen him to win Britain's Got Talent.
And what's interesting, I mean, we had a chat before today, and when you mentioned, I religiously watch Britain's Got Talent, but I have had a really busy summer, and I didn't catch it this year.
Yes.
And then you mentioned Lost Voice Guy, and I realised that I knew who that was, not because I'd seen it on the property that it was engaged we were talking about, but actually because he's gone on now to become part of the landscape of entertainment that people are just experiencing generally, right?
Yeah, that's right, and that's the idea, because it's always, and I think that's our strength at ITV, is how we bring people together, because I think in this period where you're feeling more and more that people are feeling separated and feeling different and conflicting views, I think the role of a broadcaster like ITV is to create those moments where we all come together, and it might be football where we're all cheering on England, or it might be the big entertainment shows or the big soaps, the big dramas, and I think that's the position that we have in British society.
Do you feel the weight on your shoulders, though, of getting it wrong? Because, there is that counterbalance of you get it wrong and it can be a really big mistake.
Yeah, I think that, you can't always get everything right, but I think that it's better to have tried and failed than not to try at all. And I would always sort of encourage people not to fear doing it wrong, because I think that fearing doing it wrong means that people retreat rather than going, let's have a go at this. So I think that we're all learning all the time, but I think it's really important to go out there, get involved, and try and find those communities that aren't being represented and try to represent them the best way you can. But I also think that it's who you've got behind the screens as well, because it's not just about who's on camera, but it's about who's making the creative decisions and who's deciding how portrayal is, put forward. And I think the more variety you have in your staff, the better chance you have of authentically portraying people.
Right, of course. And, I'm going to be a little bit contentious now, and I want to talk to you about, the fear of getting it wrong, the language that we use, is particularly in the landscape of social media when, fans, commentators, trolls have so much access to you. And a storm can come down on your head for saying the wrong thing. And when I was a kid, it was considered impolite to say black, to call somebody black, right?
Yeah.
And now there's LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQ+. There are all of these different layers and complexities of language that we use to describe the other, the different. Do you think that perhaps in some ways that creates a self-censoring system where we're so afraid to say the wrong thing in the public forum and get slammed for it on social media, that perhaps people pull back a little from tackling and talking openly about the big issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of, I mean, the way that I see it is that I would never intentionally want to cause offence to someone. So if I refer to someone in a certain way, and what I would like them to do is say to me, look, I don't like to be referred in that way, this is how you refer to me. So I think that what we need to have is we need to have proper interaction with each other where we can have those sorts of conversations and it doesn't feel it doesn't feel confrontational. So I think people should feel empowered that if they've been referred to in the incorrect way, they say, I prefer if you refer to me in a different way. But I also think that what we don't want is people to be so scared of saying the wrong thing that they don't interact with each other, because that sort of creates wedges where sort of misunderstanding and further differentiation happens. So I'm all for getting people to get involved with each other, and ask people. If you're not sure, ask people. Because most of the time, if someone says to me, do you want to be called black or something else, I genuinely would not be offended by that. I would just go, I'll tell you how I'd like to be referred to. And I think sometimes people worry too much about causing offence, but actually if you ask someone in the right way, the likelihood is people will just tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we heard Sheena just before this session talking about Love Island.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of Love Island.
Yes.
But it's beautiful people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There is a definite lack of diversity of body type.
Yes.
In that show. And, when we look at a lot of the really popular reality TV shows across the board, it seems in the quest for audience figures, there's this need to escalate the sort of shock value. And is that squeezing diversity out? And if it is that a problem? I mean, like, you don't see middle-aged, short, overweight people on Love Island. Is that a problem? Or is there still a place for, let's say, not quite so diverse programming?
I would say, so first of all, the first bit of the question is that I would say that shows like reality TV shows can be brilliant at introducing us and giving us understanding of different people. I mean, Big Brother, I used to work on Big Brother, and Big Brother was a great example of a show that did a lot to break down barriers and make people understand that actually they had as much in common with each other than they thought in terms of differences, because you would see different people than yourself every night of the week, so you'd get to know them in a way that was quite intimate, really, in terms of character. So I think that can happen. I think answering your Love Island, I mean, Love Island is almost, for me, like hyper-reality. It's sort of the best holiday you ever went on. It's, in the best location, and everything is sort of hyper-real. And so as a result of that, it's almost like the people on it are hyper-real. They're more beautiful than people you would normally go on a holiday with. Well, definitely in my experience, anyway. But what I think the great thing about Love Island is that the universality of it, and the reason it appeals to people that don't look like that and appeals to people across the board, is that it's people in a hyper-real setting going through normal emotions. So people are falling in and out of love like we can all relate to. So even though these people might not be relatable in terms of their body, they're relatable in terms of the experience that they're going through. But we do lots of different sort of reality shows. We did a sort of cannabis road trip which had lots of older people in. So there's lots of different sorts of shows that we can do. But Love Island is a specific type of show, and I think there's space for that. But I think if it was the only reality show we did, you'd say we're not being representative enough. But because it's sort of a suite of reality shows we do, I'm sort of comfortable with that.
Well, Sheena also described it as 12, for those who have never seen it, 12 beautiful people go to an island to try and fall in love. She missed a big bit out of the programme directive, which is they then throw in other beautiful people to try and make the original beautiful people miserable because they're fighting over each other. Do you think there's an element of, those of us that don't have the beautiful bodies, kind of like to see them suffer a little bit as well? Was it just me? Maybe that's just me.
Maybe.
Well, let's get to some of your questions now, because there are quite a few questions coming in from you, and I don't want to hog all of your time. Anonymous, don't forget you can vote up the questions if you want to hear them. Anonymous says, what examples can you give around what you've done in the workplace to make it diverse? Now, this is something that I really wanted to talk to you about, actually, because your record for the Paralympics, one of the things that I get when I speak at tech conferences around recruitment is, how do we get the people to apply. You know, we want to apply, we want to have a more diverse working environment, but we don't get any applications.
Yeah.
You clearly have the secret sauce in terms of the Paralympics. What's the trick?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, there are no quick fixes to any of this. I mean, it's a lot of hard work and a lot of trial and error. I can talk about the Paralympic example. We specifically targeted that for disabled people. So we said we want disabled people to apply for these opportunities. And that had quite an amazing effect, because I think that...
You said that in the advert?
We said that in the advert. We specifically looked for disabled trainees.
Did you not get a lashback for that?
No, we didn't. I mean, it's perfectly legal under sort of, you know, equality law, that you can, if you can prove that these people are underrepresented in your workforce, which you absolutely could, and it was a training scheme, and that's one area that you can actually do that. But what it did very clearly is it made people think, you mean me? Because it's back to that point where if you haven't seen examples of people like you working in television, when you see an advert, why would you think it was for you? Whereas we specifically said, we did a big advert after The Last Leg, which was a big sort of, you know, programme for Channel 4, which has 2 disabled presenters, and off the back of that, we got a lot of people who'd come forward. It was also, I mean, I spoke to some of the people that did the scheme because we were out in Rio with them, and sometimes it was people's next door neighbours that saw the ad and said, oh, I think Jake next door would be really good for that. So I think that. But in terms of the workplace, I think there's 2 major things that we've done at ITV. One is that we have something called the Commissioning Commitments Form, which is a bit like an inclusivity rider that's all the rage in Hollywood now, which is basically saying for every programme we commission, we expect that our production partners to commit to doing something on screen and off screen, which we agree with them up front. And I think that when people start off from the beginning, it's easier for them to do that. And I think that we've had to be much more active in our recruitment. We haven't just said, oh, people come to us. We've actually physically had to go out and connect with different groups and different organisations to try and get them to bring a more diverse workforce.
So don't be afraid, because I know, you know, if you did that in the gender diversity, you know, there are huge problems online in terms of, you know, trolling and this whole sort of, you know, Gamergate and men versus women in tech field. And, you know, I sometimes get, I'll be doing something at a Women in Tech conference, and then, of course, you get the trolls that say, oh, we don't have a men in tech thing. Would you say to people, don't be afraid of that? You know, don't be afraid of that reaction, because that's a small vocal minority who, for whatever emotional problems that they have, you know, can't deal with the idea that we are trying to balance something to be more fair. Would you say to be fearless?
I mean, it's interesting, because what I think is that data doesn't usually lie. So what you often have is the disproportion. So we've had instances where we've done something on screen and we've got a massive backlash, but then when we've looked at the data, it hasn't shown that it's put viewers off or anything like that. So I think that sometimes there can be a sort of vocal minority that can skew the conversation. And I think that if you're being authentic and you're doing things for the right reason, I think that's a good enough justification. And I think particularly also, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we do something at ITV called +1, and it's this idea that when you're doing shortlists now, you look for underrepresentation and you try to add an extra person onto that shortlist so that you're getting a wide range of people. And that can work lots of ways. So it might be that in some areas you've got all women, so you might put a woman on that short list, or it might mean in some areas you've got all, you know, able-bodied people, so you might ask for someone who has a disability. So it's just about broadening the pool, because I think that if you broaden the pool but always hire the best person for the job, I think that's how you get the most creative teams and you get the best ideas and you get diversity of thought and diversity of opinion.
Now, you have access here to an audience full of, you know, broadcasters, content creators. A question from Anonymous says, what one small thing, if every company at IBC did, would make the biggest difference?
Oh gosh, one. That's. I mean, I've written 6 things, which are here. Am I?
Ah, okay, excellent.
No, 6 things, but I don't know if it's going to work.
There we go.
Yeah, 6 things. So I think that. So I'm going to choose one, and I'm going to go through all the 6. I would say the one thing that you could really do if you, at the IBC companies, I think companies have to start to monitor their workforces. I mean, that has been one of the most powerful tools I've employed throughout my career, is that I remember having a conversation with a senior person in commissioning and saying to them, you do realise that we didn't employ very many women or very many people from BAME backgrounds directing our programmes last year. And he was like, oh, of course we did, of course we did. But having the data really brought about change. So I think data is really, really useful. So having having the actual evidence of underrepresentation. So I think if there's one thing you should do, that's one thing that you can do, because I think that can really drive change, and also it can help you measure your progress. I think also as individuals, I think the tendency is that when you have people in roles like I've got, you think that there is no responsibility on you. And I think the only way you bring change in this area is if everyone does something, which is why we wanted to bring it as part of our commissioning process, so it becomes everybody's responsibility. And I would say that we all have biases. I have biases. I particularly like black women from Macclesfield because I'm one myself. And so what you've got to do is be aware of your biases, and you've got to sort of challenge them. And so I am really aware of doing that, and I think we all have to do that when we're recruiting and when we're meeting people. We've always got to be aware of that. I think we've always got to push ourselves to mix with people that are different than ourselves, because that informs us creatively, but it also gives us a worldview and makes us more sympathetic and understand different people. So I think we should do that. I think you have to recognise and understand your privilege. I mean, you know, I have privileges, and now in my position, it's how I use those privileges to give other people opportunities. I think we all need to do that. I think you need to look at where you're finding your talent. There are a lot of people find all their talent from the same places, and then when they can't understand why the workforce is not diverse, and it's like, well, if you keep looking in the same places, you're fishing in the same sort of puddle rather than fishing in the ocean. You're always going to have the same sort of people. And I talked about number 5, and also the one thing that's really easy is watch more box sets. But you've got to watch things that you're not used to, because I think you've got to watch things that give authentic portrayal of groups that you don't normally mix with, because I think that helps to change your perspective.
And this is one of the problems, I think, you know, with content filtering, and we're speaking about this a lot in different IBC tracks as well. You know, I'm calling it the death of serendipity.
Yes.
You know, we have all of these algorithms now to float content that is more relevant to our previous likes. You know, and that serendipity of discovery when you're randomly just surfing, we're losing that. So it's important to reignite that in your life, and that's a key to diversity. Yeah,
really, really push your thinking. It really, really matters.
If you think that was a stooge, by the way, because, you know, how has Ade got a slide of 6 points for an audience question? It's because I had that question on my list as well. So well done, although I didn't ask for just one. So whoever asked that question, well done. Okay, why hasn't it happened already? Says Anonymous. The million-dollar question, why are we not in a position of diversity already?
I think because it's hard. It's really hard to bring about change. And I also think as an industry, interestingly, there are some industries that are less desirable than content production, and they've always had to have employment strategies to how they would attract people. I think because lots of people have always wanted to work in content production, we've ended up having lots of people that we've had to fight away. But what's ended up having is the people that have come to us have been like the people already existing. So I think that's been a challenge. So I think that we have to have more outward-looking strategies about how we attract people, how we retain talent, how we get people to more senior positions in our organisation.
And the last question I'm going to take from the audience, because then we have to get on to the closing. From Anonymous, how open to promoting diversity do you think broadcasting is as a whole? Do you still experience some pushback or resistance from producers, etc., to try harder?
Really interesting. That's a really, really good question. I think, if we're honest, I'm going to be really candid, is that I think that the challenge is always that people like to work with people who have done that job for them before. So if you are making a big period drama for ITV, you want to work with a director who has done a job like that before. And often that director will be a white man, for example. And so what you've got to do is you've got to work out where the opportunities are to try new talent and to give people opportunities. It probably isn't on your £1 million an hour period drama, but we have to work that out. So that really matters. But also, there comes a point, and this is what I see my role as, is I have to push quite hard with people, and I have to say, you know, look, we've got to work out a way to widen the range of people we work with, because if we don't get people further up the tree, we just keep having this circular conversation time and time again. So I think that the great thing is now is that the broadcasters are getting a lot of pressure externally from government, and there's an annual report from Ofcom. So I think there's much more accountability. So I think the appetite now is greater than it's ever been, but it's about getting enough people now into those positions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, before we go,
Yeah.
could you just tell us what you're working on? What have you got in the pipeline at the moment that we should look
Wow,
out
we've
for?
got lots of exciting things. I mean, we've commissioned Gurinder Chadha, who's famous from Bend It Like Beckham, to make a big sort of period drama in India, and she's shooting that in West London, pretending it's India at the moment. So we've got that, and we've got the second series of the RTS award-winning Time Wasters, which is when a sort of jazz quartet goes back in time, and this time they're going to go back to the time of Windrush. So we've got those coming up.
And I've seen the trailer for that. It looks absolutely hilarious. And I think it's important to remember, isn't it, that, you know, diverse content is not about lecturing. It's about creating entertainment that is more representative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Final message for the audience here?
You've all got to do something. Everyone's got to do something. It can't just be me to do something. You've got to think of the 1 or 2 things that you can do. You don't have to do all 6, but 1 or 2 things that you can do that can make a difference in your organisation.
Ladies and gentlemen, she is a powerhouse for inclusion and diversity. Please put your hands together and help me thank Ade Rawcliffe.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both Ade and Kate. Brilliant. So stay with us, because after the break, we're joined by former Channel 4 Chief Executive